One day after my husband's death, I stopped to help a mysterious man change his tire. Then he turned to me and handed me an envelope. "You need to know the truth about your husband's death." I froze when I recognized the handwriting. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." 24 hours. That's all the time I'd had to process that Thomas was gone forever. 24 hours since I'd watched them lower his casket into the ground. Since I'd felt the hollow thud of dirt hitting wood echo through my chest like a second heartbeat. The funeral was a blur of black clothing, whispered condolences, and Marcus and Jessica hovering around me like vultures in expensive suits. I was driving back from the grocery store, my first attempt at normal life since the accident. The mundane task of buying milk and bread felt surreal when your world had just collapsed. I'd grabbed whatever was closest to the entrance and left, unable to bear the sympathetic stares from neighbors who'd heard the news. That's when I saw him. A man in his 50s stood beside a broken-down sedan on Route 12, about 2 mi from my house. His tire was completely flat, and he was staring at it with the helpless expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Something about his defeated posture reminded me of how I'd felt all morning. Lost and overwhelmed, I pulled over without thinking. Thomas always said I had too much compassion for strangers, that it would get me in trouble someday. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was helping someone the day after burying the man who'd always protected me from my own kindness. "Need some help?" I called out, stepping out of my car. The man looked up, and I was struck by how nervous he seemed. His eyes darted around the empty road before settling on me. "Mrs. Patterson, Brenda Patterson." My blood went cold. I didn't know this man yet, he knew my name. In a small town like Cedar Falls, that wasn't entirely unusual. But something in his voice made my skin crawl. "Do I know you?" "My name is David Chen. I'm an attorney." He reached into his jacket pocket and I instinctively took a step back. But instead of whatever I was afraid of, he pulled out a business card and a thick manila envelope. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks, Mrs. Patterson, but given the circumstances, I had to be discreet." I stared at the envelope like it might bite me. After 32 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about Thomas's business affairs. He was an accountant, methodical and organized. He kept me informed about our finances, our insurance, everything. What could this stranger possibly have that I didn't already know I don't understand? What circumstances Thomas handled all our legal matters with Morrison and Associates downtown? David's face grew grim. "Mrs. Patterson, your husband came to me 6 months ago. He was very concerned about some irregularities. He discovered financial discrepancies involving people close to you both." The words hit me like physical blows. Financial discrepancies, people close to us. My mind immediately went to Marcus and Jessica, but I pushed the thought away. My stepson might be irresponsible with money, and his wife certainly had expensive taste, but they weren't criminals. "I think there's been some mistake," I said, backing toward my car. "Thomas would have told me if something was wrong. He was trying to protect you." David's voice was urgent now, almost pleading. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure you got this. He held out the envelope. "Mrs. Patterson, I've been trying to find a safe way to contact you for 3 weeks. Your husband's death wasn't, don't." The word came out harder than I intended. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Thomas died in a car accident. Black ice on Miller's Bridge. The police report was very clear, but even as I said it, doubt crept in. Thomas had driven that route to work for 15 years. He knew every curve, every dangerous spot. He was the most careful driver I'd ever known, someone who checked the weather obsessively before leaving the house. David must have seen the uncertainty in my eyes because he stepped closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Please, just read the letter. If you don't believe it, throw it away." But Thomas made me swear I'd get this to you, even if it put me at risk. At risk. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. What kind of risk? Instead of answering, David pressed the envelope into my hands. His fingers were shaking. I can't stay here much longer. It's not safe for either of us to be seen together. Read the letter tonight alone. If you decide you want to know more, there's a phone number inside. Call it from a payphone, not your home phone. Before I could protest, he was already getting back into his car. The flat tire that had supposedly stranded him was now perfectly fine. I realized with growing horror that this entire encounter had been staged. Wait, I called after him, but he was already driving away, leaving me standing on the side of the road clutching an envelope that felt like it weighed 1,012 meses. The drive home passed in a haze. I kept glancing at the envelope on my passenger seat, Thomas's name written across it in handwriting I didn't recognize. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. When I pulled into our driveway, my driveway now, I suppose I noticed Marcus's BMW parked outside. Through the kitchen window, I could see him and Jessica moving around inside my house. They'd been helping me organize Thomas's affairs, which mostly seemed to involve going through his papers and asking pointed questions about bank accounts and insurance policies. I slipped the envelope into my purse before going inside. Whatever David Chen wanted me to know, I wasn't ready to share it with anyone else. Mom. Jessica's voice was syrupy sweet, the same tone she used when she wanted something. We were so worried when you didn't answer your phone. Where did you run off to? The question felt loaded, suspicious. Had they been watching me? Just needed some groceries, I said, forcing a smile. You know how it is. Marcus looked up from the stack of papers he'd been sorting through on Thomas's desk. We've been going through Dad's financial records, trying to get a handle on everything for you. There are some accounts here I don't recognize. Did he ever mention keeping money in other banks? My stomach clenched. Financial discrepancies. No, everything should be at Cedar Falls National. That's where we've banked for 20 years. Jessica exchanged a quick glance with Marcus. It was barely a second, but I caught it. Of course, Mom. We just want to make sure we don't miss anything important. You shouldn't have to worry about these details while you're grieving. They stayed for another hour, asking subtle questions about passwords, safe deposit boxes, and investment accounts. Questions that seemed helpful on the surface, but felt increasingly invasive. When they finally left, I locked the door behind them and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The envelope seemed to burn through my purse as I sat at the kitchen table staring at it. Part of me wanted to throw it away without reading it to pretend David Chen had never existed. But Thomas's voice echoed in my memory. Trust your instincts, Brenda. They've never steered you wrong. My instincts were screaming that everything was wrong. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Thomas's familiar handwriting filled the page, but the words made no sense. They couldn't be real. My darling Brenda. If you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you everything while I had the chance. But I was trying to protect you from a truth too dangerous to share. Our family isn't what we thought it was. The people we trusted most have been lying to us, and I'm afraid their deception runs deeper than either of us could imagine. Don't trust anyone, especially not Marcus and Jessica. There are things happening that you need to know, but it's not safe to put everything in writing. David will explain the rest. Be careful, my love. Nothing is as it seems. The letter fell from my hands as if it were on fire. Nothing is as it seems. I didn't sleep that night. Thomas's letter lay open on my nightstand, the words seeming to glow in the darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David Chen's nervous face, heard his warning about risk and danger. By dawn, I'd read the letter so many times I had it memorized. The phone number Thomas mentioned was written in pencil at the bottom of the page, almost like an afterthought. I stared at it through my morning coffee, my hands still shaking from exhaustion and fear. At 8:30, I drove to the old payphone outside Murphy's gas station on the outskirts of town. My fingers fumbled with the coins as I dialed. David answered on the first ring as if he'd been waiting. Mrs. Patterson. How did you know it was me? Because you're the only person who has this number. His voice was tense, urgent. Are you somewhere safe? Somewhere we can talk? I looked around the empty parking lot. I think so. David, what Thomas wrote in that letter. It can't be true. Marcus might be irresponsible with money, but he's not dangerous. And Jessica, she's just materialistic. They're not criminals. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to think back over the past year. Really think. Were there conversations that stopped when you entered a room? Phone calls. Marcus took in private times when Jessica seemed to know things about your finances that she shouldn't. The questions hit me like physical blows, because the answer to all of them was yes. I sank against the payphone booth, memories flooding back with awful clarity. Last Christmas, I'd walked into the kitchen to find Marcus and Jessica huddled over some papers, whispering intensely. The moment they saw me, Jessica had swept everything into her purse and started chattering about dinner plans. When I asked what they'd been discussing, Marcus said it was a surprise for Thomas's birthday. Thomas's birthday wasn't until June. Then there was the time in March when Jessica had casually mentioned knowing the balance in our savings account. When I asked how she knew that information, she'd laughed and said Thomas must have mentioned it. But Thomas never discussed our private finances with anyone, not even me, unless it was necessary. And the phone calls. Marcus had been getting more and more phone calls that he'd step outside to take. When I'd commented on it, he'd said it was work stuff too boring to discuss. But Marcus worked as a middle manager at a small manufacturing plant. What kind of work required that level of secrecy? You remember, don't you? David's voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. Thomas started noticing these things too. That's why he came to me. What did he tell you exactly? He said Marcus had been asking a lot of questions about your joint assets, your house, your retirement accounts, the life insurance policies. Marcus claimed he was just trying to help you both get organized for the future, but something felt off to Thomas. I closed my eyes, remembering those conversations. Marcus had been very interested in our financial planning, offering to help us streamline our accounts, suggesting we put everything in one place for easier management. At the time, it had seemed thoughtful. Now it felt like something else entirely. There's more, isn't there? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Thomas hired me to do some investigating, discreet inquiries into Marcus and Jessica's lifestyle, their spending habits, their associates. David paused and I could hear papers rustling. Mrs. Patterson, in the past 2 years, they've been living well beyond their means. Designer clothes, expensive vacations, a new car every year. Marcus's salary from the plant couldn't support that lifestyle. Maybe Jessica has family money. Her parents live in that big house on Elm Street. Her parents are mortgaged to the hilt. They've been struggling financially for years. No, Mrs. Patterson. Marcus and Jessica's money is coming from somewhere else. Somewhere they don't want anyone to know about. The implication hung heavy in the air between us. I thought about all the times they'd visited. How Jessica always seemed to know when Thomas was getting a bonus or when our insurance payments were due. How Marcus had volunteered to help Thomas with his computer after claiming he was having trouble with his accounting software. Thomas's computer, I whispered. Marcus had access to Thomas's computer. What are you thinking? 6 months ago, Thomas mentioned his accounting program was running slowly. Marcus offered to help fix it. He spent an entire evening working on it while Thomas was at his book club meeting. My voice grew stronger as the pieces fell into place. David Marcus could have seen all our account information, our passwords, our financial records, everything that matches the timeline of when Thomas first came to see me. Mrs. Patterson, we think Marcus and Jessica have been planning something for months. The question is what and how far they're willing to go to get it. The morning sun felt cold against my face as the full weight of his words sank in. My stepson and his wife weren't just irresponsible or greedy. They were actively plotting against Thomas and me. What was Thomas planning to do with this information? He wanted to confront them. He'd scheduled a meeting with Marcus for the day after he died. The words hit me like a physical blow. Thomas had died on a Tuesday morning. The meeting would have been Wednesday. David, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm not saying anything definitive, Mrs. Patterson, but the timing is suspicious. Thomas was being very careful in his final weeks. He varied his routes to work, checked his car for tampering, even started carrying a small recorder to document any strange conversations. A recorder. My voice came out as barely a whisper. Did he record anything? Yes. And what's on those recordings is going to shock you. I gripped the payphone so tightly my knuckles went white. What kind of recordings? Conversations between Marcus and Jessica. They didn't know Thomas was listening. Mrs. Patterson, they've been discussing your assets like they already owned them. They've been making plans for after Thomas was gone. Talking about how to get you to sign papers, how to gain access to accounts. The world seemed to tilt around me. I had to lean against the phone booth to keep from falling. How long has this been going on? Based on the recordings, at least 8 months, maybe longer. Thomas documented everything methodically like the accountant he was. Dates, times, exact quotes. He was building a case as if his own family were criminals he needed to prosecute. The betrayal cut so deep I could hardly breathe. David, I need to hear those recordings. Are you sure? Once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. And Mrs. Patterson, there are things on those recordings that will change how you see everything, including Thomas's death. I closed my eyes thinking of my husband's gentle face, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity. Thomas had died believing his own son was stealing from us. The last weeks of his life had been poisoned by this knowledge, and I hadn't even known he was suffering. I'm sure I need to know everything. Oh, meet me tonight at 900 Hours at the Riverside Diner on Highway 41. Come alone and make sure you're not followed. If Marcus and Jessica suspect you know something, they might accelerate whatever they have planned. The line went dead before I could ask what he meant by that. I stood in the parking lot for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, trying to process everything I'd learned. My stepson, the boy I'd helped raise after his mother died, was planning to rob me. The woman I'd welcomed into our family was plotting against me, but the worst part was the timing. If David was right, if Marcus and Jessica really had been behind Thomas's accident, then my husband had died trying to protect me from people I'd trusted completely. As I drove home, I noticed Marcus's car parked across from my house again. He was sitting in the driver's seat talking on his phone, but he hung up the moment he saw me. When I waved, his smile looked forced, artificial. For the first time in 32 years of marriage, I was grateful Thomas wasn't alive to see what his family had become. But then a new thought crept in. One that made my hands shake so badly I had to pull over. What if Thomas had discovered something so dangerous that they'd killed him for it? And what if I was next? The Riverside Diner was nearly empty when I arrived at 900 sharp. David was already seated in a corner booth, a manila folder thick with documents spread across the table. He looked exhausted, like a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. When he saw me approaching, he quickly gathered the papers and slid them into the folder. Mrs. Patterson, thank you for coming. His voice was barely above a whisper, and his eyes kept darting toward the entrance. I wasn't sure you would. I slid into the booth across from him, my hands trembling slightly. I almost didn't. Part of me keeps hoping this is all some terrible mistake, that there's a reasonable explanation for everything. David's expression was grim as he opened the folder. I wish there were, but what I'm about to show you, there's no innocent explanation for any of it. The waitress appeared a tired, low-looking woman in her 60s, who clearly wanted to close up for the night. David ordered coffee for both of us, then waited until she was out of earshot before continuing. Mrs. Patterson, before we begin, I need you to understand something. What Thomas discovered wasn't just family greed. It's much bigger than that and much more dangerous. He pulled out a small digital recorder and set it on the table between us. This contains conversations Thomas recorded over the past 4 months. Are you ready? I nodded, though every instinct told me to run. David pressed play, and suddenly Thomas's voice filled the small space between us. He was in his study at home, and I could hear the familiar creak of his desk chair as he settled into work. Then I heard other voices, Marcus and Jessica talking in what they clearly thought was privacy. The old man's getting suspicious. Marcus was saying he's been asking too many questions about the Henderson account. My blood went cold. The Henderson account. I knew that name. Eleanor Henderson was an 83-year-old widow who lived alone on Maple Street. Thomas had done her taxes for years, and she trusted him completely. Jessica's voice came through clearly. How much do you think she has left? At least $200,000 in liquid assets, maybe more. She's been living off Social Security and a small pension barely touching the principal. Perfect. We just need to keep Thomas distracted until the transfer goes through. Once we have access to her accounts, we can move the money offshore like we did with the others. The others. I gripped my coffee cup so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter. David, what are they talking about? What others? He paused the recording and pulled out a stack of photographs. Bank statements, forged signatures. Transfer documents. Mrs. Patterson, your stepson and his wife have been running a sophisticated elder fraud operation. They target elderly people who trust Thomas to handle their finances. Then they systematically drain their accounts. The photos blurred as tears filled my eyes. These weren't strangers' bank statements. I recognized the names. Mrs. Kowalski from church. Mr. Peterson, who lived 3 houses down. The Yamadas, who'd been our neighbors for 15 years. All elderly, all alone, all trusting. How many, I whispered. We've identified at least 12 victims over the past 2 years. The total amount stolen is approximately $800,000. $800,000. The number was so large I couldn't even comprehend it. But how Thomas would never. He's the most honest man I know. Thomas wasn't involved. They were using his name, his reputation, his client relationships, but he had no idea what was happening. Marcus has been intercepting mail, forging signatures, creating false documents. Jessica handles the technical side. She's apparently quite skilled with computers and financial software. David started the recording again. This time I heard Jessica explaining how she'd hacked into Thomas's client database. How she'd learned to forge his signature perfectly, how they'd set up fake companies to hide the money trail. The beauty of it is that most of these old people won't notice for months, Jessica was saying with a laugh that made my skin crawl. By the time they figure out their money's gone, we'll be long gone too. What about Thomas? Marcus asked. He's bound to notice eventually. That's what the life insurance is for, Jessica replied casually, as if she were discussing the weather. $500, $1,000 is a nice consolation prize. And once he's gone, Brenda will be so grateful to have us handling everything. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. They were talking about Thomas's death like it was part of their business plan. David paused the recording and reached across the table to steady my shaking hands. Mrs. Patterson, I know this is difficult, but there's more. More? How can there be more? He pulled out another photograph. This one showing Marcus's car parked outside Murphy's Auto Repair. This was taken 2 days before Thomas's accident. Marcus was having work done on his car. Specifically, he was having a device installed that could interfere with another car's braking system. The diner seemed to spin around me. You're saying they murdered him? I'm saying they had the means and the motive, and the timing is too convenient to be coincidental. Thomas was scheduled to meet with the FBI the day after he died. He was going to turn over all his evidence and testify against Marcus and Jessica, the FBI. My quiet, methodical husband had been working with federal agents. The man who got nervous when he was 5 minutes late to church had become an undercover informant in his own family. Why didn't he tell me? The question came out as a sob. He was trying to protect you. Look at this. David showed me a handwritten note in Thomas's careful script. He wrote this the night before he died. He was planning to send you away to visit your sister in Florida while the FBI made their arrests. He didn't want you anywhere near the danger. I read Thomas's note through my tears. Brenda is innocent of all of this. She must be protected at all costs. If something happens to me before we can move forward, please make sure she knows the truth. She deserves to know that I loved her enough to try to save her from this nightmare. He knew, I whispered. He knew they were going to kill him. We think so. Yes, Mrs. Patterson. The accident report shows that Thomas's brakes failed completely. No mechanical reason, no wear and tear. The brake lines were severed, but in a way that would only become apparent under extreme pressure, like the kind of pressure you'd encounter on a steep curve during icy conditions. Miller's Bridge, the steepest, most dangerous curve on Thomas's route to work. If someone wanted to cause an accident that would look natural, that would be the perfect place. David, if this is all true, if they really killed Thomas, then I'm in danger too. The realization hit me like ice water. They're not done. He nodded grimly. The life insurance money isn't enough for them. They want access to your joint assets, your retirement accounts, everything. And they've been positioning themselves as your support system. The loving family members who will help you through your grief. I thought about how they'd been coming by every day asking about passwords and bank accounts, offering to help with paperwork. How Jessica had suggested I update my will to make things easier for everyone. How Marcus had volunteered to handle Thomas's estate. They're going to try to get me to sign something, aren't they? Almost certainly. Power of attorney documents, estate transfers, maybe even a new will that benefits them. And if you resist... David didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The waitress approached our table, clearly wanting to close up. David quickly gathered his papers and left money for the coffee. Mrs. Patterson, we need to get you somewhere safe while we figure out our next move. Next move, David, we have to go to the police. Show them the evidence. It's not that simple. Marcus and Jessica have been very careful. The evidence is largely circumstantial, and they have alibis for the night Thomas died. Plus, they've been portraying themselves as the grieving family members. Any accusations from you would look like the paranoid ramblings of a distraught widow. We walked out to the parking lot together, and David handed me a prepaid cell phone. Use this to contact me. Don't use your home phone or your regular cell. And Mrs. Patterson, be very careful what you say around Marcus and Jessica. If they suspect you know anything, they might accelerate their timeline. I sat in my car for a long time after David left, staring at the evidence folder he'd given me. 12 elderly victims, $800,000. My husband murdered for trying to do the right thing, and I was next on their list. But as I drove home through the dark streets of Cedar Falls, a new emotion began to replace the fear and grief, anger, pure burning rage at the people who'd betrayed Thomas's trust, stolen from vulnerable elderly people, and murdered the man I loved. They thought they were dealing with a helpless widow who'd be easy to manipulate. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Marcus's BMW was gone, but there were fresh footprints in the snow leading to my back door. Someone had been trying to get into my house while I was gone. As I unlocked my front door, I realized something else. The funeral had been 3 days ago, but I was no longer grieving. I was planning. And Marcus and Jessica had no idea what was coming. I barely slept that night, every creak of the house making me jump. The footprints in the snow kept haunting me. Someone had tried to break into my home while I was meeting with David, and I knew exactly who it was. And by morning, I'd made a decision that would have terrified the old Brenda, the one who'd existed just 4 days ago. I was going to confront them, but I had to be smart about it. David's warnings echoed in my head. If Marcus and Jessica suspected I knew the truth, they might do something desperate. I needed to act like the grieving widow they expected me to be while gathering more evidence. Around 10 in the morning, Marcus called. His voice had that false concern I was now learning to recognize. Mom, I was thinking about you last night. You shouldn't be alone in that big house. Why don't Jessica and I come over? We could help you go through more of Dad's things. Go through Thomas's things. Looking for evidence, more likely. That's thoughtful of you, Marcus. I'd appreciate the company. They arrived an hour later. Jessica carrying a casserole dish and wearing an expression of practiced sympathy. "I made your favorite tuna noodle casserole," she said, giving me a hug that felt like ice. "You need to keep your strength up." I thanked her and put the casserole in the refrigerator, making a mental note never to eat it. After what I'd learned about these two, I wasn't taking any chances. Marcus went straight to Thomas's study while Jessica stayed with me in the kitchen. I watched through the doorway as he rifled through drawers and filing cabinets with practiced efficiency. This wasn't grief or helpfulness. This was a search operation. "Marcus seems very thorough," I said to Jessica, testing the waters. She followed my gaze and laughed. "You know how he is about organization. He just wants to make sure we don't miss anything important. There might be insurance policies or investment accounts that Thomas never mentioned." The casual way she said it made my skin crawl. She was fishing for information, trying to find out what I knew about our finances. Thomas was very organized. He kept everything in the safe deposit box at the bank. Jessica's eyes sharpened. "Oh, that's smart. Do you have the key?" "Of course. We'll need to go together sometime this week to inventory everything." I watched her face carefully as I said it, and saw the flash of excitement she tried to hide. "That sounds like a good idea. These things are always easier to handle when family works together." Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth now. Marcus emerged from the study looking frustrated. "Mom, did Dad keep any files at his office? I can't find some of his client records." My heart raced. He was looking for evidence of the elder fraud scheme, probably trying to figure out what Thomas had discovered. He brought most of his work home during tax season. "What kind of records?" "Oh, just some client files. Nothing important." But his tone suggested otherwise. "You know, it might be easier if I had access to his computer passwords for settling his business affairs." There it was. They wanted access to Thomas's computer where he'd probably kept digital copies of all his evidence. I forced myself to look confused and helpless. I wouldn't even know where to begin with his computer. You know how hopeless I am with technology. Jessica jumped in immediately. "We could help with that, Mom. Marcus is very good with computers. I'll bet he is." I thought that's very kind, but I think I should probably have his business partner handle the professional matters. Thomas always said work and family should stay separate. The look Marcus and Jessica exchanged was barely concealed irritation. Their helpful facade was starting to crack. "Of course," Jessica said with forced brightness. "We just want to help however we can. These practical matters can be so overwhelming when you're grieving." I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead I slipped into the guest bedroom where I could overhear their conversation. They thought they were whispering, but sound carried easily in the old house. "She's being evasive," Marcus was saying. "Something's different about her today. Maybe she's just processing everything. It's only been a few days. No, this is different. She's not as helpless as she usually acts. And did you notice how she steered us away from the computer?" My blood ran cold. They'd seen through my performance. "Do you think she knows something?" Jessica's voice was tense. "I don't see how she could." The old man was careful about keeping her out of his business affairs. "But we need to move faster. Get her to sign those power of attorney papers this week." "What if she refuses?" There was a long pause, and when Marcus spoke again, his voice was cold in a way that made my knees weak. "Then we'll have to consider other options. We've come too far to let her ruin everything now." Other options. The phrase hung in the air like a threat. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, understanding with crystal clarity that my life was in immediate danger. I forced myself to return to the kitchen and act normal. But my mind was racing. They were planning to kill me probably after getting me to sign documents that would give them access to everything Thomas and I had worked for over 32 years of marriage. The afternoon dragged on with painful slowness. Marcus continued searching through Thomas's papers while Jessica peppered me with seemingly innocent questions about our finances. How much life insurance did Thomas have? Had we ever discussed what I wanted to do with the house? Did I have a will? Each question felt like a probe, testing my defenses. I answered vaguely, playing the confused widow, but inside I was cataloging every word for David. Around 4,000. Jessica suddenly brightened. "Oh, Mom, I almost forgot. I brought some papers for you to look at. Just some simple estate planning documents that might make things easier going forward." She pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before, filled with official-looking forms. "It's nothing urgent, just some basic powers of attorney that would let Marcus and me handle financial matters if you ever need help. You know, writing checks, dealing with banks, that sort of thing." I stared at the papers, my heart pounding. This was it. The trap they'd been setting since the moment Thomas died. If I signed these documents, they'd have legal access to everything, and then I'd become expendable. "This seems very complicated," I said, pushing the papers back toward Jessica. "Maybe I should have a lawyer look at these first." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus looked up from Thomas's desk, his expression hardening. "Mom, we're family. You don't need a lawyer to review simple estate planning documents. We're just trying to help you." "I know, dear, but Thomas always said the most important financial decisions should never be made quickly. Maybe we could discuss this next week." Jessica's smile became strained. "Of course, but these really are just standard forms. Most widows find them very helpful." Most widows. As if she'd dealt with many of them. I wondered how many other elderly people they'd manipulated with the same caring act, the same helpful family routine. "I'll think about it," I said firmly. Right now, everything still feels so overwhelming. They left shortly after, but not before Marcus made one final search of Thomas's study, and Jessica reminded me twice about the papers. As I watched them drive away, I realized the game had changed. They knew I was suspicious, and they were running out of patience. I called David from the prepaid phone the moment their car was out of sight. "They tried to get me to sign power of attorney documents," I said without preamble. "And they're planning to accelerate their timeline." I heard them talking. "What exactly did you hear?" I repeated the conversation word for word, including Marcus's mention of other options if I didn't cooperate. David was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Patterson, you're in immediate danger. They've moved past manipulation into direct threats. We need to get you somewhere safe tonight." "I'm not running from them, David. They killed my husband. They've been stealing from helpless elderly people. I won't give them the satisfaction of scaring me away. This isn't about satisfaction. It's about survival. If they think you're a threat to their operation, I am a threat to their operation," I interrupted. "And I intend to be a much bigger one before this is over." But even as I said the words, fear crept up my spine. Night was falling, and I was alone in the house where Thomas had been murdered, where someone had already tried to break in once. As if reading my thoughts, David said, "At least let me arrange for some protection. I know people who can watch your house tonight." I agreed, partly because it made sense, and partly because the alternative was spending the night jumping at every shadow. After we hung up, I double-keyed every lock and drew all the curtains. Then I sat in Thomas's chair in his study, surrounded by the evidence of his final weeks, and tried to understand how our quiet life had become a battleground. At 11:30, I heard a car in the driveway. My blood froze. David's people weren't supposed to arrive until midnight, and they were supposed to stay outside. I crept to the front window and peered through the curtain. Marcus's BMW was parked in my driveway, and I could see two figures moving toward the house. They weren't coming to the front door. They were heading around back. I grabbed the prepaid phone and David's card, then crept toward the rear of the house. Through the kitchen window, I could see Marcus and Jessica examining my back door with flashlights. Jessica was holding something that looked like lockpicking tools. They weren't here to help with my grief anymore. They were here to finish what they'd started. I dialed David's number with shaking fingers, but before he could answer, I heard the distinct sound of my back door opening. They were inside the house. "David, they're in my house," I whispered into the phone, barely breathing. Marcus and Jessica just broke in through the back door. "Get out now. Don't worry about anything else. Just get to your car and drive to the police station." I crept toward the front door, but froze when I heard Marcus's voice from the kitchen. "Check upstairs. I'll search down here. The old woman has to have Thomas's evidence somewhere. The old woman. The contempt in his voice made my blood boil, but terror overrode anger. I was trapped. If I tried to leave through the front door, they'd see me. If I stayed, they'd find me within minutes. That's when I heard another voice, one that made my heart stop completely. Looking for something specific, Thomas. My Thomas was speaking in my kitchen. I must be having a breakdown, I thought. The stress had finally broken me, and now I was hearing my dead husband's voice. But then Jessica screamed a sound of pure terror that echoed through the house. That's impossible, Marcus was stammering. You're dead. We saw your funeral. You're dead. Death has been greatly exaggerated, Thomas said calmly. Hello, son. Jessica. I think we need to talk. My legs nearly gave out. This couldn't be happening. I'd watched them lower Thomas's casket into the ground 3 days ago. I'd grieved for him, planned to avenge him, accepted that he was gone forever, but that was definitely his voice coming from my kitchen. On shaking legs, I crept toward the sound. Through the doorway, I could see them. Marcus backed against the refrigerator, his face white with shock. Jessica collapsed in a chair, hyperventilating. And there, leaning calmly against the kitchen counter as if he'd never left, was my husband. Thomas looked exactly the same except for a small bandage on his forehead and a weariness in his eyes that I'd never seen before. He was wearing the blue sweater I'd bought him for Christmas, the one he'd been wearing the morning he supposedly died. Hello, Brenda, he said softly when he saw me in the doorway. His voice was gentle, loving, but tinged with sadness. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man I'd buried was standing in my kitchen talking to our would-be murderers like he was discussing the weather. This isn't possible, Jessica kept repeating. This isn't possible. Thomas pulled out a chair and gestured for me to sit. I know this is a shock, darling. David wanted to prepare you better, but events moved faster than we anticipated. David, the lawyer. He'd known Thomas was alive all along. You bastard, Marcus snarled, some of his color returning. Do you have any idea what you put us through? The funeral, the grief, the relief. Thomas interrupted quietly. Don't pretend you mourned me, Marcus. I heard the recordings of you celebrating my death. I know about your plans for Brenda. The fight went out of Marcus like air from a punctured balloon. He slumped against the refrigerator, finally understanding that their scheme was over. I found my voice at last. Thomas, how I saw your car the accident. They said you were. I couldn't finish the sentence. He moved closer, his hand reaching for mine. I knew they were planning to kill me. David and I had been working with the FBI for months, but we needed more evidence. When I discovered they'd tampered with my car, I had to make a choice. So you faked your own death. The question came out harsher than I intended. All the grief and terror of the past few days condensing into anger. You let me think you were dead. Thomas's face crumpled with pain. Brenda, if there had been any other way than letting your wife plan your funeral, than making me bury an empty casket. Tears streamed down my face, but I wasn't sure if they were from relief or rage. Do you know what these past 3 days have been like? I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. He glanced at Marcus and Jessica, who were watching this reunion with growing desperation. But first, we need to finish this. Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a small recording device. Marcus, Jessica, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder fraud, and about 15 other federal charges. Under arrest. Marcus laughed bitterly. You're not a cop, old man. You can't arrest anyone. That's when David Chen walked through my back door, followed by 2 people in FBI windbreakers. Actually, David said, we can. The next hour was a blur of handcuffs, Miranda rights, and federal agents searching my house for evidence. Marcus and Jessica were led away in separate cars, both of them still looking stunned that their carefully planned operation had fallen apart so spectacularly. Through it all, Thomas stayed beside me, his hand on my shoulder like an anchor in a storm. But I couldn't look at him, couldn't process the fact that he was real alive here. When the house finally emptied, leaving just Thomas and me alone in our kitchen, the silence was deafening. "Brenda," he said finally, "please say something." I turned to face him, studying every detail of his familiar face. The small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the laugh lines around his eyes that had deepened over our 32 years together, the gentle expression that had made me fall in love with him when we were both young and naive about the world's capacity for betrayal. "How?" I asked simply. He sat down across from me, his hands folded on the table like he was about to deliver bad news. "The morning of the accident, David called to warn me that the FBI had detected unusual activity around my car. Someone had been tampering with it overnight. Marcus, yes. We realized they were ready to move to the final phase of their plan. David and I had less than an hour to decide what to do." "So you chose to fake your death rather than simply having them arrested?" Thomas sighed deeply. "The evidence wasn't complete yet. We had recordings, financial records, but nothing that would guarantee convictions on the federal charges. If we'd arrested them, then they might have gotten light sentences, or worse, they might have walked free and disappeared. So instead, you decided to traumatize me. Instead, I decided to protect you." His voice was firm now, the accountant's precision I'd loved for 3 decades. "Brenda, they were planning to kill you too. Not immediately, but soon. As soon as they got access to our assets. This was the only way to keep you safe while we gathered enough evidence to put them away permanently." I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man I'd married with someone capable of such an elaborate deception. "The funeral." "Thomas, I planned your funeral. I picked out your casket and chose your burial suit and wrote your obituary." "I know." His voice broke slightly. "David told me about every detail. The flowers you chose, the song you asked them to play, the speech Marcus gave about what a wonderful father I was. He cried at your funeral," I said bitterly. "Actual tears. Crocodile tears. We have recordings of him celebrating my supposed death less than an hour after the service. The casual way he said it made something inside me snap. Stop it. Stop talking about this like it's just another case file. I grieved for you, Thomas. I mourned the love of my life. I spent 3 days planning how to avenge your murder." He looked genuinely surprised. "Avenge my murder? I thought they'd killed you. I was going to destroy them for it." The admission surprised me too. I was so angry, so hurt that I was planning things I never thought I was capable of. Thomas reached across the table and took my hands in his. They were warm, solid, absolutely real. "I'm sorry. I know those words aren't enough, but I am so deeply sorry for what I put you through. When David told me you'd discovered the truth about Marcus and Jessica that you were investigating on your own, I realized I'd underestimated you. Underestimated me, how I thought I was protecting you by keeping you ignorant. I thought if you didn't know the truth, they wouldn't see you as a threat." He squeezed my hands gently. "But you're stronger than I gave you credit for. Braver. When you heard David's evidence, you didn't fall apart. You fought back." I pulled my hands away from his. "I wouldn't have needed to fight back if you'd trusted me with the truth in the first place. You're right." He didn't try to defend himself, didn't make excuses. "I made the wrong choice and it hurt you in ways I'll probably never fully understand. But Brenda, I need you to know that every decision I made was because I love you more than my own life." I looked at him sitting across from me at the kitchen table, where we'd shared thousands of meals, made countless plans, built our life together. One conversation at a time. He was the same man who'd held me through my mother's illness, who'd supported my dreams even when they seemed impossible, who'd loved me unconditionally for 32 years. But he was also the man who'd let me bury an empty casket. "I don't know how to forgive this," I said honestly. "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness," he replied. "But I know I love you, and I know I want to spend whatever time I have left earning back your trust." Outside, dawn was breaking over Cedar Falls, painting the kitchen in soft golden light. In a few hours, the phone would start ringing. The news of Marcus and Jessica's arrest would spread through town like wildfire. People would want explanations, answers, the full story of how their quiet neighbor had returned from the dead to bring down a criminal conspiracy. But for now, it was just Thomas and me sitting in our kitchen, trying to figure out how to rebuild a marriage that had been shattered by necessary lies and impossible choices. "Where do we go from here?" I asked. Thomas looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, or fear. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out if you'll let me." For the first time since David Chen had handed me that envelope, I smiled. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. It was a beginning. 6 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse watching Marcus and Jessica receive their sentences. The judge's words echoed through the packed courtroom. 22 years for conspiracy to commit murder, elder fraud, and racketeering. Justice, it turned out, had a very specific sound. Thomas sat beside me, his hand resting lightly on mine. We were still rebuilding, still learning how to trust each other again, but we were doing it together. The road back hadn't been easy, and some days I still woke up angry at him for the deception. But most days now I woke up grateful that he was alive to be angry at. The victims' families filled the first 3 rows of the courtroom. Eleanor Henderson, now 84, had been the first to testify. Her voice had been steady as she described losing her life savings to people she'd trusted completely. When she finished, she'd looked directly at Marcus and said, "I hope you understand what you took from me. It wasn't just money. It was my future, my security, my ability to live independently in my final years." 12. Elderly victims in total. 843,000 stolen lives, disrupted retirements, destroyed, trust shattered. The full scope of Marcus and Jessica's operation had been even worse than we'd initially known. The FBI investigation revealed that they'd been running similar schemes in 3 other states before settling in Cedar Falls. They'd targeted Thomas specifically because of his reputation for honesty and his elderly client base. Their plan had been to milk his business relationships for everything they could get, then disappear with new identities they'd already prepared. Thomas's death was supposed to be the final stage, eliminating the one person who might have discovered their activities while also providing them with life insurance money and access to our joint assets through me. The defendants showed sophisticated criminal planning and a callous disregard for their victims. The judge continued, "This court finds no mitigating factors that would justify leniency." I watched Jessica's face crumple as the reality of 22 years in federal prisons sank in. Part of me felt sorry for her, the part that remembered welcoming her into our family, helping her plan her wedding to Marcus, sharing holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday dinners. But mostly, I felt relief that she couldn't hurt anyone else. Marcus showed no emotion at all as he was led away in handcuffs. He'd maintained his innocence throughout the trial, claiming that Jessica had manipulated him, that he'd been a victim too. The jury hadn't believed him, and neither had I. The recordings Thomas had made revealed Marcus as the mastermind, the one who'd identified vulnerable targets and planned their systematic exploitation. After the sentencing, we gathered with the other victims' families in the courthouse cafeteria. It wasn't a celebration exactly, but there was a sense of closure that had been missing for months. Eleanor Henderson hugged me tightly. "Thank your husband for me," she said. "If he hadn't been brave enough to investigate, we might never have gotten justice." Thomas accepted the thanks graciously, but I knew he still carried guilt about not acting sooner. The therapist we'd been seeing together said that was normal, that survivors of betrayal often blame themselves for not recognizing the signs earlier. Dr. Martinez had been helping us navigate the complex emotions of rebuilding our marriage after such a fundamental deception. Some sessions were productive, others were painful, but we kept going because we both wanted to find our way back to each other. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight, she told us in our first session. It's reconstructed slowly, one honest conversation at a time. We'd had many honest conversations over the past 6 months about Thomas's decision to fake his death without telling me about my anger at being excluded from decisions that affected my own life, about how we could have handled the situation differently. We'd also made practical changes. Thomas had insisted I be involved in every aspect of his business going forward. I now had access to all his client files, his computer passwords, his financial records. No more protective secrets, no matter how well-intentioned. In return, I'd stopped punishing him for a choice he'd made under impossible circumstances. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was acceptance that we'd both done the best we could with the information we had at the time. The drive home from the courthouse was quiet. Thomas finally broke the silence as we turned onto our street. "How do you feel?" I considered the question carefully. Relieved, sad, angry that it had to come to this. I paused, grateful that you're here to see justice done. Our house looked different now somehow. We'd changed the locks, updated the security system, and I'd insisted on repainting the kitchen where I'd first heard Thomas's voice after believing him dead. Small changes, but they helped make the space feel like ours again, instead of a crime scene. We'd also made larger changes. Thomas had sold his accounting practice to his partner and taken early retirement. At 62, he was too young to stop working entirely, but he wanted something less stressful, less dependent on the kind of intimate client relationships that Marcus and Jessica had exploited. I'd surprised myself by going back to school. At 59, I was working toward a degree in social work with a focus on elder advocacy. The idea had come to me during one of our therapy sessions when Dr. Martinez asked what I wanted to do with my anger about the crimes. Channel it, I'd said without thinking. Use it to help other people avoid what we went through. Thomas had been completely supportive, even helping me navigate the college application process and study for entrance exams. It felt good to have a purpose beyond rebuilding our marriage, something that was entirely my own. That evening, we sat on our back porch watching the sunset. It was the same porch where Thomas had secretly recorded Marcus and Jessica planning their crimes, but we'd reclaimed it by spending time there together, making new memories to overlay the painful ones. "I got a letter from David today," Thomas said, pulling an envelope from his shirt pocket. "The FBI wants to offer him a full-time position with their white-collar crime unit." David Chen had become something of a hero in the law enforcement community for his role in exposing the elder fraud ring. His willingness to risk his own safety to deliver Thomas's message to me had been crucial to the case's success. "He deserves it," I said. "He saved both our lives." "He did." Thomas opened the letter and scanned it quickly. "He's also recommending us for the FBI's Victim Advocacy Program. They want people who've been through this kind of experience to help other victims navigate the legal process." The idea intrigued me. We could help other families who'd been torn apart by financial crimes, other elderly victims who'd lost their savings to trusted advisors. We could turn our painful experience into something useful. "What do you think?" Thomas asked. I leaned back in my chair, watching the last traces of sunlight fade from the sky. 6 months ago, I'd been planning my husband's funeral and plotting revenge against his killers. Today, I was contemplating a future where we'd help other people heal from similar betrayals. "I think it sounds perfect," I said. Thomas reached over and took my hand. "We make a good team, don't we?" I squeezed his fingers, feeling the solid reality of his presence. We always have, even when we didn't realize it. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked different than I had 6 months ago. Older, yes, but also stronger, more aware. The woman looking back at me had survived betrayal, grief, terror, and deception, and had come through it with her compassion intact. The old Brenda had been trusting to a fault, content to let Thomas handle the difficult aspects of life while she focused on home and family. The new Brenda was still compassionate, but she was also vigilant. She asked questions, demanded answers, and trusted her instincts even when they led to uncomfortable truths. Both versions of me had loved Thomas deeply, but the new version loved him with her eyes wide open. "Ready for bed?" Thomas asked from the doorway. "Almost." I turned away from the mirror and smiled at him. Just thinking about everything that's happened, how much we've both changed. Do you regret any of it? Not the crimes or the deception, but the way we've grown from it. I considered his questions seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said I just wanted my old life back, the comfortable routine of trusting without question. Now I understood that comfort had come at the cost of awareness, that my willingness to remain naive had made me complicit in my own vulnerability. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret becoming someone who won't be fooled again." Thomas nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. "I love this version of you. You know, even when she's angry at me for lying to her, especially then," I corrected him. "The angry version of me is the one who was ready to take on criminals to avenge you. She's the one you're going to want on your side for whatever comes next." As we turned off the lights and settled into bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete peace. Marcus and Jessica were in prison where they belonged. The elderly victims they'd targeted were beginning to recover their stolen assets. Thomas was alive, real warm beside me in our bed. We'd survived betrayal by the people we'd trusted most, and we'd emerged stronger, more united, more purposeful than before. Tomorrow we'd start the next chapter of our lives, helping other families navigate the aftermath of financial crimes. We'd turn our pain into purpose, our experience into expertise. But tonight we were just Thomas and Brenda Patterson, married 32.5 years, lying in bed in our house in Cedar Falls, grateful to be alive and together, and ready for whatever challenges the future might bring. Some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.